In today's episode, we are going to be reviewing our previous episodes this year of the podcast and also looking ahead for what we have to come. But before we get into all of that, Favour, we have not even a guest, we have a new addition to the family. Who have we got who's joining us today?
Yes, but firstly, a warm, happy half year to all our listeners. We're really happy to be joining you in the second half of 2025. And today we have Yasmin, and just as Richard said, not a guest, a co host. So, yes, over to you, Yasmin. Tell the Flywheel Economics audience a bit about yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. So it is an honor to join this podcast as someone who was watching it on the side and being here and speaking on it feels surreal. So my name is Yasmin and I am a junior programs associate here at Flywheels, working together with Mr. Richard and Favor, and it's been such a pleasant time. And I have a background in international development as I studied political science and international relations. And just recently, I submitted my dissertation on media representation of Northern Nigerian women, the criminals and the offenders, just basically studying their behavior. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. Back to you, Favor.
So lovely, Yasmin, and welcome once again. We're really excited to have you join us and Flywheel Economics to be part of the wider family. So, to our dear listeners, we're hearing a different voice from just mine and Richard's. We have Yasmin, and very interesting background that you have, Yasmin. So we're really excited to have you here because your background is going to bring another exciting mix to the Flywheel Economics podcast.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Yasmin. Lovely to have you on board. I guess we can use this episode not just to bring Yasmin up to speed on some of our past episodes from this year, but we can also bring our listeners up to speed, although I'm sure everyone has listened to all the episodes. But just in case one slipped through the gap, this may be a good episode for you. Favo, what's the first episode we kick the year off with?
2025 has been an awesome year so far, and our first episode was our welcome to 2025 episode. But in that episode, what we wanted to do was set out the topics that we'd be covering. And so officially, in terms of thematic areas or topics that we covered, we started with regenerative tourism. And our guest was Dr. Tamara Muwowo of the Commonwealth Secretariat. And it was really interesting to hear, especially coming from the lens of Commonwealth small states and how they are building resilience after the whole COVID-19 period, and how they have continued to grow and build tourism that is not just sustainable but can be regenerated. We explored themes that talked about the fact that, okay, what's the difference? It has been used interchangeably in the past, sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism, but we went further to say that it's beyond just, as Richard liked to say, beyond just, using your towel more than once or not washing your bed sheets every day. It's actually being mindful that I'm coming into this place. How can I put down roots? How can I ensure that I'm living it better? I'm sure a lot of people, that's not what they think when they start off their trip, when they're just coming to relax. But regenerative tourism calls for greater mindfulness. So that was our first episode, and it was such a great one.
I was reminded of a trip to Fiji, which I undertook with the Commonwealth Secretariat, where there was a comment somebody made to me, which was, every hotel has a marine biologist. Every hotel has a marine biologist. And they sort of raised a few question marks as to some of the qualifications of the supposed marine biologists and these things. And look, I have no reason to doubt the credentials of them. But I think the point that they were getting at was often some of the bigger hotel chains were seeing ecotourism as being a sort of bolt-on, something which was a box to tick, something that was part of their corporate social responsibility, but not a core part of their business model. And I think when we look at regenerative tourism, one of the key things which seems to be the difference between just sort of sustainable tourism or ecotourism or something that is being performative towards that is the fact that it's an essential part of the business model and that authenticity in what they're trying to do, whether that's about working with local communities, local cultures, but also working with the environment and how that help rebuild systems, whether that's coral reefs, whether that's planting mangroves, or work with the forests. It's all part of building something stronger than what it started with. So it can be a really powerful force, and I think that's such an important episode for those who want to understand what we as Flywheel Economics are about, because I think regenerative tourism is absolutely aligned with that. Yasmin, have you heard about regenerative tourism before?
Mostly just familiar with regenerative agriculture, which we just started dabbling into. But yeah, I would love to learn more. Sounds very interesting.
Well, I would encourage you, Yasmin, like I would encourage our listeners, if you want to learn more about this, then there's a wonderful podcast episode that was carried out in January on this topic. Favor, what's next? What was the next episode we looked at?
Another favorite for me was sovereign wealth funds. So it was deeper roots, how countries can build their wealth or sustain it over time. And our guest on that particular episode was Nico Kies, who works with the African Development Bank. And it was awesome hearing from her, because I think of sovereign wealth funds as basically a country's savings account, but we know that it's more than that. It doesn't just represent a pot of money where they keep aside, but it's also an opportunity for a country to do more. It can spur investment, it can even contribute to revenue of a country. And so we talked about nations that can be emulated, such as Norway. We know that Norway has the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world. And so, yes, that was an interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, we were very lucky on Friday. We went off to a regenerative agriculture farm, and as part of that, Andrew from SCL, who owns the farm, has got a great vision around what he wants to do with that, was showing us these half moon shapes on the farm that were dug into the ground. And the purpose of that was to try and get the water not to run off the soil and strip the soil of nutrients, but to go down deep into the soil and become a sort of reservoir which the plants could tap into with their longer roots well into the dry season. And so when we're looking at the sovereign wealth funds, we're looking at that kind of savings equivalent for countries, right? So when the oil revenue comes in, when the money comes in the good times, it's being saved and it's being accumulated. It's not just running off and stripping away the nutrients from the soil, but it's there to be tapped into when needed, and that can then boost the resilience for the country. So what the principles we see in regenerative agriculture, we can actually see in terms of big fiscal policies and fiscal approaches, and through the sovereign wealth funds. Have you come across sovereign wealth funds before, Yasmin? Have you, what's your experience with them today?
So I think my experience would be maybe from school, hearing a bit about National Treasury Fund or something like. Is it related?
I think the best way to look at it is a country's savings account, like Favor was saying, but not just savings. It can also be investment. So it can also be putting money into things which will be long-term assets for the country. So it could be infrastructure even. And Second Niger Bridge was one of the projects which the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund was able to unlock and get investment into. And so these big infrastructure projects are things that will, last for generations and have an economic return for the country. So it can both be savings in terms of cash to draw on when there's a rainy day, and so there's a rainy day in Abuja today, but it can also be about those investments for the future. So yeah, it was a fascinating one, and Nicole was a great guest to have on, given her broad experience in sovereign wealth funds across Africa.
Yeah, it was personally an episode that I enjoyed, because just back to what Richard was saying, when you look at something that is sovereign wealth fund, talking about money, it can look like it was just policies, but we always want to bring it back to our flywheel economics principles, because it's about building resilience into a country's economy. And then our next episode, we went back because in 2024, we started our affordable housing mini series with 3 episodes. And in 2020, we continued with Glenn Jordan, who is a CEO of a company called Empower, that is utilizing blockchain technology to create a system that can work outside of the mortgage system, so people in the informal economy can have access to affordable housing. A very fascinating topic, I would say, because when we think of blockchain, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, what comes to mind? But we see that it's another angle. And what was amazing about that episode is another thing that we always say here in Flywheel Economics, how innovations have the power to unlock the economy. So we look at Empower, we look at what they are doing with blockchain, and it's not just about making money. It's not just about, oh, here's a shiny new innovation or here's a shiny new technology. It's about how can we use this technology to leverage change in communities.
Yeah. I think one of the most impressive things for me from hearing from Glenn was, the way an entrepreneur works. He'd had several attempts at trying to solve the problem. He had a very compelling vision of the problem he wanted to solve, right? Knowing that poor people were often paying more in rent for the properties that they were in than they would pay on sort of mortgage repayments if they owned the property, and they would be in much better houses as well if they had that ability, trying to find a fix to all of that. And he was experimenting with some very cutting edge innovations, technology, and trying to apply them in this space. And some things didn't work, and he was very open about the things they tried that hadn't worked. But rather than sort of give up, he took it away and tried to adapt and adjust his business model. And that's what leads to successful businesses: that ability to adapt and that resilience to keep going.
And there's something interesting that you said with poorer people having to pay more for rent. I think it's very interesting because there was this theory that we were taught in school, the red boot theory. I don't know if you're familiar with it as an economist.
What's it called?
Red boot theory.
Oh no, please explain.
Okay, so it's basically so there are two sets of people. The first person is a poor boy, and the other one is a rich boy or from a more privileged home. So the poor boy ends up buying multiple boots because he doesn't have money to afford one quality boot, and in long term he pays more than the boy from the privileged home that buys one boot. So let's say the one boot that he bought is let's say $100, and the poor boy keeps buying boots and he keeps getting spoiled and rained wet by the rain or mud or whatever. So it's like he pays maybe $20 for one, thinking, oh, I'm poor, so this is what I can afford. And in the long run, he ends up paying $200, $300. He keeps buying the boots because his own it doesn't have quality. So I think that also applies in the housing, the affordable housing, with them living in maybe slums or bad houses, and then they go through different problems, and then they end up having to pay in the long run, maybe health, maybe malaria issues, all these other issues, and maybe fixing their houses as well, instead of just having enough or appropriate funds that would just lead them to buying something once, or leading them to safely housing themselves once.
Yeah, absolutely, Yasmin, and that's a great reflection, because you're absolutely right in terms of the poverty traps that can emerge when the boot example is spot on, right? And I think that's what Glenn was seeing with the housing market as well, in terms of those people that were renting very poor condition housing. So it's good that finding ways where people can overcome those hurdles and get themselves on more, not just affordable but better standards for housing is crucial. I mean, it's like in Nigeria, where as a maybe a backup source of power, right? You've got like the traditional gen, and of course it may, in the lifetime of running a gen and buying fuel for the gen and all the rest of it, it may absolutely be cheaper to pay the upfront cost and buy solar panels. But it could just be that somebody doesn't have the bulk money upfront to buy the solar panels, and so they keep on using the generator, keep on using the fuel, even though they would be much better off to have bought solar panels. So it's just one of those effects. So it was really interesting to see the pay-as-you-go mortgages that Glenn had put together, which allowed that kind of flexibility for people whose income and ability to save or to invest or to pay back a mortgage is such that would be variable. It wouldn't be steady over time, and so having products that meet that need can be transformational.
And I thought that was a really good point you made, because I once about, and somebody was saying that people don't realize how expensive poverty is, and I think it speaks to your point about the boots, and then to Glenn's point about people living in slums and paying more. That was really wild. So still on affordable housing, we went to our other episode, which was our fifth episode within the mini series, and this time we had Olu Olariwaju as our guest, and we focused on the policy side. We talked about the fact that, okay, we who should be the leader, because one thing that we saw over and over again is that when it comes to affordable housing, there are multiple players. We have people like Glenn and Syntellect doing what they can to help people in the informal sector. We have the banks, obviously, the financial institutions, and our guest Simon Wally from the World Bank spoke to that. And of course, we have people like Real and different things like that. But with Olu, what we wanted to discuss, among other things, was, okay, where do policies come in? What role should the government make? And unequivocally, without any restraint, Olu was adamant that the government has to be the leader, even if there will be a lot of private sector players, but the government must be the one to take that leadership role to ensure that the affordable housing flywheel, as we will say, gains momentum.
Yeah, there was a quote that he gave during that episode along the lines of, the private sector doesn't show up for affordable housing. And I think that's pretty much universally true around the world, where developers are going into focus on affordable housing. It's because governments have put incentives in place to make it something which developers have to explore. So it's they would much rather be building luxury flats or high end things which they can have a much bigger profit margin on. So Olu was absolutely right to draw attention to that and help us think through various models, whether it's the Rwanda project he was working on, or others where there's some degree of government guiding of the private sector in order to make housing, or to enable affordable housing to go to scale.
Very interesting points, Richard. And yeah, it was still an amazing time. Our mini series, I will come to that. But just our next episode after that was on the trade tipping point. So we've dabbled into a bit of controversial waters this year. We're starting with Trump's tariffs and just looking at trade from the Pakistan agenda. We had a trade specialist, former WTO ambassador for Pakistan, that was Dr. Mansour, and he came and he spoke to what things like protectionism does to a country, and that's just understanding what can be done, especially in what was seeming to be a very turbulent time for international trade. And it was eye-opening to understand that sometimes we need to take a step back. And I believe it was your wording, Richard, when you said that trade policy has to be a matter of the head and not the heart. As much as we hear go with your heart, there are some things that you most definitely do not want to go with your heart, and that is trade policy.
Yeah, and in that episode, I think Dr. Mansour gave some very compelling examples from the automobile industry in Pakistan, where companies were sort of forced to invest into the country, but then had lots of local content requirements, some of which made sense, some of which did not make so much sense. The idea that the companies would have to put in place locally made tires on the vehicles, and then what tended to happen was when somebody spent out for one of these new Toyota cars or new Hyundai, whichever brand of car it was, then the first thing that they would do traditionally was replace the tires and buy the foreign imported ones to replace it with. Something is not quite going right in the policy if it's leading to those kind of outcomes, cars that are more expensive than others would pay for them elsewhere in the world, and quality of what the consumer is getting, which isn't up to the levels which they should be getting. And so it's really about trying to look through what policies are going to be effective in this space and what leads to a dynamic, competitive sectors that can thrive and not just be sluggishly, churning away, producing substandard products out of it. They want to have ones which are, giving benefit for the citizens of the country that they're in.
And still staying on controversial topics that we have delved into this year, the next episode was with our dear colleague Deep Biswas, and there we talked about measuring value for money in international development, especially in the face of the aid cuts that is currently ongoing. Scattered this once again, Mr. Donald Trump, yes, by the total dismantling of US aid and all the effects that happened for afterwards. And so, especially as value for money consultants, we came with that framework. Okay, this is what, it's not just about cost cutting, because when people think value for money, everybody's mind is, oh, let's spend less, let's use economy, let maybe stop flying and things like that. But we were saying, is that can that be it? Because if you cut costs, we still have problems in the world. We still have things that we will still need to come and still need to address. And so it's not a matter of cost cutting. And that was what we took a step back to discuss. Just take a deeper dive on when we say value for money, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, and here it's that thing of trying to avoid being penny wise and pound foolish, right? You want to look at both, not just the costs of what you're doing, but also the benefits of what you're doing. And that's not to say that programs can't cut costs somewhere, because clearly they can. Like, we, in our own expenditure, most of us can all find ways we can cut costs and not making massive differences to the standard of living. Sometimes it's just about making smarter decisions, right? But I think with the aid budget being as scarce as it is now, making sure that it's all the more important to make sure that what resources are available are being spent in the best possible way. And I think that's what our episode focused on, and some of the tools which are out there to help international development programs to ensure that they are able to live that.
After that episode, we were back to affordable housing, this time land titling. And I think I won't say that it was the most surprising, because I think all our affordable housing episodes, the mini series episodes, have brought something new that we have learned. But land titling too was that episode where we learned that, oh, it's not just to put it just like our guest Andrew Smith said, it's not just about having red squares drawn on a paper. It's not just enough to say, oh, here you go, here's a sheet of paper, you have title to land. Does it actually convey? Does it convey any rights? Does it mean anything? Or, as he said, it's not what the paper that they have been printed on, but that in terms, especially in emerging markets like Nigeria or countries that do not have any form of land governance. Okay, I'm going to take a step back. And we do, in Nigeria, we do have land governance, because as I'm a lawyer, I'm just imagining my land law teacher coming after me. So I'll take a step back. In Nigeria, we do have land governance system, just in terms of that complexity. In some states we haven't gotten there. And he talked about being in Kano and the big program that was done there. So in terms of emerging markets that are still building, I think that's the proper and accurate way to say that, still building their land governance systems, that it's important that what land titling should do is to be able to convey valuable information.
I think, Favor, the thing that really stuck out for me from that episode, and I hope this is not sacrilege to say this to a lawyer, but that the piece of paper, as you were saying, drawing the red squares on a map and being able to say, right, this is your land title. It's not enough for it just to be a legal piece of paper, or a piece of paper which has some sort of legal meaning. It only is valuable if there is a sense by all parties that that is enforceable, and that if somebody were to dispute that there would be a way in which that would be reconciled. So mortgage banks are not lending mortgages on the back of these land titles at the moment because there is doubt as to how enforceable those land titles would be. And so when Andrew's talking about the work that they did in Kano several years back, he's sort of saying, well, look, this is not the end point. You can't take those land certificates and go to a bank and get a mortgage on the back of it, because at the moment there isn't this trust that they would be enforceable, right? But give it 10 years, say, from the time they did it, if nobody else has made a claim on those plots of land within those 10 years, that's a reasonable position to actually start saying, yes, these are enforceable, and these are ones which can hold. And if they do that and have the mechanism of which the title can be enforceable, then why not? Why can't these be used to leverage mortgage finance or create the secondary markets that are needed for a vibrant housing market? But I think the point being is, like, there's a lot of underlying ingredients that need to be there beyond just the piece of paper, and a piece of paper in itself is just a piece of paper.
Yes, exactly. That is important to build trust within these systems. And shortly moving from Kano, we went to Senegal, where we met a former colleague of Richard's, actually, an economist turned EV founder. So we spoke to Marcella, who started a electronic vehicle taxi company in Senegal, and simply because of air pollution, because he was sitting in the and the fun fact for people who might have not listened to that episode, Matt can drive. I thought that was that was really funny, and yet he started this company in response to a problem that he saw happening in Senegal. And it was a matter of fact that, okay, instead of sitting back, instead of complaining, which is what an average person does, if am I in a position to bring about a change? He looked inward, looking at his international exposure and the opportunities that he had, being a former defeat economist, and he took those steps. And today, he's bringing change, small, slow, steady, but that change is happening. So, Yasmin, any insights on this episode?
Okay, so this is one of the episodes that I listened to, and I found it really interesting that he got into the car industry, even though he wasn't really interested in cars, as he mentioned, or he doesn't know how to drive as well. But I think it was very interesting that he had a climate perspective of it, that he said 5% of the vehicle industry in Dakar, only 5% of them are taxis, but the 5% of the taxis contributed to 40% of the gas emissions and the pollution of the city. And there were a lot of issues with health. He mentioned lead being inside children's brain. And so I thought that was really interesting that he also looked at that, and he wanted to be someone who prevented that from happening. And also the profit aspect of it, so that also the drivers started benefiting from it, being able to pay back in 3 years and owning their own car, rather than just having to fuel the car, not just actually owning it and actually having property. So I think that was really interesting, and it was really insightful to see someone be involved in environment as well as also the monetary opportunity for the drivers. So yeah, I really liked that episode.
I think one of the most remarkable things for me in all of this was the whole part of having to bring your own ecosystem with you when you're setting up your business. So you're not relying on something that's already set up there. You're doing something new, and you have to fill in the gaps where you find them. And there are more gaps in, say, electric vehicles in Senegal than there would be if you were doing conventional cars, of course, because there's you don't have the electric charging stations. You don't have some of the regulation that's required, ability to get license plates, and all that stuff had to be worked through, and that's hard, and that takes time. And he's doing it, but others will be able to benefit on the back of that, because once somebody has done that, it allows others to enter the market as well. So I'm not encouraging lots of people to set up rival businesses to Matt, but I am saying that it can be hard when you go into a new space and when you're having to figure it out as you go along. And we know entrepreneurs in Nigeria as well who are going into sectors that aren't as developed and they face their struggles. Favor and I were speaking with Richard Ali last week, who set up a Tigray coffee company, and the coffee sector in Nigeria is nowhere near as developed as the cocoa sector is. And some of the examples he was giving of some of the challenges he faced are not challenges that you would face if you were in the cocoa business in Nigeria. They are very unique to the coffee business. And so he's having to do a lot more in terms of making the way for things than he would otherwise had if he was going into an already established sector of the economy. Now, the interesting thing to see with Matt's example is the degree to which, in the long term, he's able to reap the rewards from having done all that heavy lifting of creating the ecosystem, because there'll definitely be a benefit for Senegal from that. But will there also be a benefit from a sort of a profit perspective from the company he's doing? And hopefully for Matt, there will be.
And I think another point to note is just the fact that you have to be a true believer of whatever you're chasing. Because if you're not a true believer, you having to all the frustrations that you face in terms of building your ecosystem, you're just going to abandon it or run away. But I believe that people like Matt saw something and say, okay, I can create change here, and then he has continued to pursue it and see it through despite all the regulatory hiccups, funding, and things like that. And just talking about believers, our most recent episode features a true believer in political economy. That is the person of Peter J. Evans, or as he likes to say, not that Peter Evans. And sitting with Peter, we talked, because our episode with Deep was the beginning of a new mini series, this time on aid effectiveness and value for money. And so, sitting with Peter, we came through the lens of political economy, we came through the lens of teen age tick politics, and what does it truly mean to be when we say aid effectiveness. And so he took us through the lens, as I said, of political economy, the fact that a lot of times aid is influenced by foreign policy, which is not a lie, which is not something that is hidden. It's a known fact. And but that this doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Sometimes we have seen aid that's just done for good not bring out the result. And so we had to be honest in that episode, because that was the watchword that Peter was saying, that we have to be both modest and honest. And so we tried to hold those caps together and say, okay, what does it mean, especially in this era of teening aid, or in this era of aid cuts? What does it mean to be honest about our results and modest about the things that we can accomplish?
Yeah, Favor, it was interesting. You and I have done quite a bit of work for the ISF portfolio for the UK, which was set up as a very much a portfolio of interventions to try and tackle issues that come back to bite the UK rather directly from other countries, whether that's through irregular migration, whether that's through narcotics, smuggled narcotics, all sorts of bad things in the world that happen. And it's a very unapologetic portfolio in terms of why it's pursuing things, but it's not also doing it from a sense of not having benefits on the country they're working with. So the benefits are mutual, but it's very very open about why it's doing what it's doing. It wants to tackle narcotics from being smuggled because it doesn't want the narcotics entering the UK market. It wants to stop irregular migration because irregular migration is unsafe, it's dangerous, has huge consequences, and huge risks for the individuals involved. So it goes through all of those areas, and it's very straightforward. And in a way, it positions itself very much at the in the space where the whole international development industry is now going, right? Because it is being very more explicit now than ever about why money is being spent and how it's pursuing agendas which are beneficial to the country that's spending the money. The degree to which the justification now has to be about how it will impact on the home country that is sending the money is more than it's ever had to be before in the past. And that's partly because of the erosion of the base, which believed in international development for the sake of international development, for the sake of it being fair, just, right, all the rest of it. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it's quieter now than it's ever been, or at least it's ever been in my memory. And therefore, being able to draw the more why it's in the UK's interest, the US's interest, the rich countries' interest to solve problems or to help work with countries, partner with countries to solve the problems in their own land, that's been more necessary than ever before. Yasmin, you listened to the episode. What's your reflections?
I would just like to add a bit on what you said about the land, sorry, irregular immigration or illegal immigration, I think you said. So, but if these rich countries that are complaining about people coming into their countries, if they help with aid and stuff like that, that would reduce at least to a level the immigration, the illegal immigration and drugs coming in. But I think there's a problem with the 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 policies, the looking at which money goes to what and how much should this be given to this country and stuff like that. So I think that's their own concern. And I also do not think it's the job of the countries that are receiving the aid to handle themselves as like, oh, we need this money and stuff like that. It should just be that, oh, these issues are like everybody can see them. The issues are seen everywhere, and the help it should just be like regulated. And I think that's what Mr. Peter Evans was saying, that yes, there is sometimes this money, this aid is being spent wastefully, and then sometimes it's being spent well. So how do the rich countries differentiate between the two?
Yeah, I think one of the areas which Peter focused in on was the big sort of health, education, big spending programs, which historically, the UK has done a lot of development assistance in, and looking at the degree to which it's got the outcomes that that were hoped for in those areas. And some areas have really struggled, right? In terms of health and education programs and how they get to the root of the challenges. And they've tried different things, but I think what he's just trying to get at is that in this world where aid is a very, very finite, depleted resource now, the degree to prioritize, the degree to focus on the things that are going to make the most difference is more important now than ever.
I think I would like to go back to the electric car points, because he did mention that he had to create his own ecosystems. So I feel like there are issues in certain countries that the ecosystems are not being built. So that is why it's taking time, and it's harder for countries to now look back on and think, oh, this isn't working. My money is being spent wastefully because the ecosystem is not there, and building it is hard because the CEO of the electric cars in Dhaka did mention that it was very difficult for him he had financial issues, he had loan issues, he had investment issues. So I think like issues like that sometimes present themselves in aid as well, and there's no existing system. Everything has to be built from scratch. I think with education, for example, I think education was recently embraced in the north where I'm from. So you have to sit down and convince a whole village that education is good for girls. Because at some point it was just like, oh, education is for boys, working is for boys, any money is for boys, and then girls are just secondary to all that. So having to sit down for maybe years to explain that is difficult, because sometimes you take 10 steps forward and you think people understand, then you now have to now come back and take 10 steps backwards, because what you're trying to put out is not being understood as such. So I think sometimes that is also like a missing factor in the aid industry. Let the countries that are sending out aid also know that sometimes their ecosystems being built, and that's why it is taking so long for them to see the money that they're spending is effective and it's working and things are working.
I think what you've just done there, Yasmin, is really put your finger on one of the heart of the very deep challenge in international development that some of the most important problems to solve are some of the trickiest, and they're starting from really low bases. And so they can take a lot of time to come through. So I think you're absolutely right. And we tackled this a little bit in the Value for Money, the episode 1 of the Aid Effectiveness and Value for Money series, where we talked about equity and the idea that often when you're looking at a set of results, right? So maybe it's easier to educate a girl in the south of Nigeria than it is in the north of Nigeria because of all the societal, cultural factors that go into it. So if you're just looking at a metric of the number of girls who've gone through secondary education or attained certain levels of educational achievement through it, and you're just counting them, you say, well, we managed to achieve twice the amount of girls in the south of Nigeria compared to the north. Therefore, it's bad value for money to educate girls in the north of the country, and we're going to focus all our money on the south. That would immediately violate the principle of equity, which is so important in value for money, which means that just because something is hard to do doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do it. And every person, say in the every girl should have a right to an education, right? No matter where you're based. And so the challenge that then comes from that is we're saying, right, we want to do meaningful changes and we want to do them in hard. We don't want to avoid where it's hard to do it. But then do we have the patience to then wait through and say, well, actually, you know what? Success from this several £100 million program over 5 years wasn't that you got so many girls to complete school to the degree required, but it was that you put some foundations in place that might in the future make it nearer to being happening. And that requires a lot of patience, and that requires a lot of understanding that, a lot of these problems aren't just simple, they're quite complex. So thank you, Yasmin, for reminding us about that.
Thanks, Yasmin. I think that was a really insightful point, and this is key. This is why we do this, right? Having a mid-year review and just taking stock, because it's so easy to consume. Because that's one thing that we're accused of in this generation: constant consuming of things. But we need to pause. We are both the producers and consumers of our own content, but we need to pause and ensure that we're really digesting, because it is the process of digesting the lessons that we have learned so far that we're able to actually implement and create change. And so I think just taking up from there, we've discussed 10 episodes, so year to us, that we have done in 2025. But now it's now a matter of looking ahead and thinking about what we want to accomplish in the final half of 2025.
So one of the things I found very interesting with the Matt episode on electric vehicles, I think, is hearing some of the entrepreneurs' stories that come through and how they're trying to navigate, in new areas, in new ecosystems. And I think I would like us to look for more types of episodes in the second half of the year, which learn from those kind of stories. I want to get Richard Alley on the podcast if we can to talk about building a coffee business in Nigeria, where sort of the ground coffee beans that roasted beans that are ground and then consumed in that sort of way, which you would find maybe in East Africa, Europe, and other places, isn't really done. And so he's building a whole new market and the challenges that come in with that. So I think hearing individual entrepreneur stories, how they're taking their business in such a way where they bring the supportive ecosystem with them, I think will be very illustrative for our flywheel economic principles as well. Favor, Yasmin, both of you, what would you want to see for episodes coming forward?
I think for me would be bringing our affordable housing mini series to a close. When you're wrapping a gift, there's two types of ways. So it's either you use wrapping paper and like it's thoroughly wrapped and it's good to go, or you can have something like what Santa Claus has, like a knapsack with like drawstrings. So he's always able to open it and add things. And I think for us, we are going with the Santa Claus type of wrapping in our affordable housing mini series, because the more we uncover, the more we realize that there's more to uncover. But everything has to have an endpoint or at least a comma. And so we're looking at wrapping up our affordable mini series with a comma or Santa Claus knapsack.
Okay, that's really nice, people. I do hope that we get the Santa Claus hamstring you're talking about. So, for me personally, I would also like Mr. Richard said, to see um entrepreneurs going into markets and building ecosystems, and so that it gives people hope, and maybe someone will be watching or be listening to us and think, oh, if someone is doing this and it's so hard, I can do it as well. And also like kind of like a push for people and also governments when they are listening, policymakers, to see how things can seem hard, but it's important that we start working on them. I would also like to see maybe a bit of um maybe women empowerment, us bringing women that are interested in elevating other women in terms of economic yeah, in terms of just economies, yeah, just like involving more women and all. So yeah, that would be what I would like to see the second part of the year. And congratulations to us for having 11, or to you guys for having 11 episodes. That's really good.
Well, thank you, Yasmin. And it's good you spoke about women's economic empowerment, because we do intend to have a women's economic empowerment mini series that it would be lovely to explore over the second half of the year. Not least looking at one of the programs in northern Nigeria that was very close to my heart, the Mafita program, which worked for technical vocational skills for very marginalized young people, and helping them get really life-changing kind of support to get them into formal sector jobs as a result of the skills that they were taught. So the women economic empowerment angle of that, I think, is very interesting, and there'll be lots of other interesting areas we can go to on women's economic empowerment as well. Just as a little bit of a I worked quite a lot in Pakistan on economic development issues, and it's really, the women's economic empower angle is really constraining in Pakistan. It's really difficult in terms of labor force, female labor force participation, education, all the kind of things similar to what you would see in northern Nigeria in terms of the story for the majority of women who grow up in those areas. And the way I would describe it when I was in Pakistan is it's like having when you have an engine, like a 4-cylinder engine. If you're just going to if you're going to ignore women's economic empowerment, then it's like you've only got 2 of the cylinders on your engine firing, and you've got 2 of the cylinders that you're not utilizing, that you're not bringing together. So how do you expect your economy to fly when you've got a 4-cylinder engine and you're only using 2 of them? And you've got to fix that engine so all cylinders are firing, and then you can really take off as an economy. And that's what I'd say would be true for northern Nigeria as well, as well as any other country, to be honest. The more you can address the women's economic empowerment, the more chance you have of all the cylinders on your engine firing. Favor, what about you? Any other thing you want to see in the second half of the year?
I think just optimism. So exciting days ahead. And I dare say that this next half is going to be the best half for us here at Flywheel Economics. And taking a look from entrepreneurs to women empowerment, it's set to be another dynamic time. And all I can say for that is just inviting our listeners to come on this journey with us. Well, you don't win a race if you stop halfway. So we're halfway. Let's go to the end of 2025, and then we'll see you again in 2026. But yes, just for now, really excited about the topics that we're going to bring your way, and looking forward to exploring and meeting all our guests.
Well, I think that's a good part to end the episode on, Favor. What I would do is, just in the spirit of our aid effectiveness and value for money mini-series, which I know we will do a few more episodes on, but I do want to plug the petition which is on the UK Parliament's website right now to restore the UK's leadership in international development. And it's basically a call for a reversal of the funding cuts that were made to the UK AIDS budget. So if you are interested in that, please go to the Parliament website, check out that petition, and if you feel willing to, please add your name. But over to you, Favor, to wrap up the episode.
Thank you, Richard. And just to note that the link to the petition will also be in the description of this podcast episode, so you can just look for it and sign. So thank you, Yasmin. It was awesome having you, and looking forward to recording more episodes alongside you. And yeah, thank you. As I said earlier, we are so happy that you've come alongside us this first half of the year. Looking forward to all that the second half, the better half, brings. And in the meantime, I know that you are really intrigued by the fascinating topics that we cover. You can head over to our website at flywheeleconomics.com. And we would love to hear from you. Your thoughts, your comments, they matter to us. So please feel free to leave us a comment on any of our social media channels. We're on X, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook. Our handle across board is Flywheel Economics. Until next time, this has been the Flywheel Economics podcast.